Socrates is one of the most renowned figures in history, a remarkable thinker whose philosophical legacy continues to be researched, studied, and debated around the world. Despite becoming an extremely well-known figure, Socrates never founded a school, nor did he write anything with his own hand. What we know about his life and philosophy has come down to us through other authors, three of whom are considered the most important: Plato, Aristophanes, and Xenophon. Plato is certainly the best known of the three, as he was Socrates' pupil and went on to become a highly influential philosopher in his own right. These three authors portrayed Socrates in very different ways. Plato, who lived between 428 and 348 BC, and Xenophon, who lived between 430 and 355 BC, were both great admirers of Socrates. The Greek playwright Aristophanes, on the other hand, held a far less favorable view of the Athenian philosopher. Aristophanes dealt with Socrates in a comedy from 423 BC entitled The Clouds, in which the Greek thinker is ridiculed and portrayed as a false sage, a corrupter of youth, and a man disrespectful of the gods. Aristophanes also presents Socrates as a sophist, though it is worth remembering that this playwright wrote some of the most celebrated comedies of ancient times, and the caricatured style he used was typical of the genre. While we cannot be certain of his exact intentions, Aristophanes' writings are nonetheless valuable for what they reveal about the life of the great Greek philosopher. Despite his unflattering portrayal, Aristophanes wrote things that are remarkably consistent with the accounts of Xenophon and Plato. For example, he mentions dialectics as a communicative tool used by Socrates, and he references the well-known Socratic method, through which the philosopher questioned his counterparts. The Clouds also contains interesting biographical details. Socrates is described as a simple, poor man who walked barefoot and lived in a very modest house. His humility was one of the defining hallmarks of his life, as cited in numerous sources. In the memorable Thoughts of Socrates, Xenophon wrote that Socrates kept no slaves, ate and drank simply, wore only a coarse cloak in both summer and winter, and went without shoes or a tunic. In addition to these three main authors, other important figures have written about Socrates, including Diogenes Laertius, Cicero, and Aristotle. By combining the accounts of these writers, scholars have been able to piece together a picture of Socrates' life and thought. Socrates was born in Athens in 469 BC. His father was the sculptor Sophroniscus, and his mother was the midwife Phaenarete. Paintings, frescoes, and sculptures give us some idea of his physical appearance. By all accounts, he was not particularly handsome, but this detail matters little when set against the mastery of his thought and the greatness of his legacy. He was, however, attractive enough to win the affection of Xantippe, whom he married and with whom he had a son named Lamprocles. According to some sources, he also had 2 children with another wife. Socrates was averse to luxury. He dressed simply and shabbily, led a modest life, and attached no importance to material possessions. These traits became his trademark. At times his behavior was unusual, drawing the attention of his contemporaries. On some occasions he would stand completely still in deep meditation, remaining motionless for a very long time, as though entirely absorbed in his thoughts and oblivious to everything around him. In the dialogue of the Symposium, Plato recounted several of these traits. He wrote that Socrates was remarkably resilient to cold. While others sheltered from the frost, the philosopher would face the outdoors wearing only a blanket, walking barefoot on ice without any apparent discomfort. Once, at Potidaea in 432 BC, he reportedly stood motionless for 24 hours, gazing at the horizon and reflecting on an idea, a sight that astonished the soldiers camped with him. Plato also tells us in the Symposium that Socrates could drink like no other man and yet was never seen drunk. For a period of his life, Socrates attempted to follow in his father's footsteps as a sculptor, but without success. During his youth, he served in the military and took part in the Peloponnesian War, the conflict between Athens and Sparta that lasted from 431 to 404 BC, earning significant recognition for his bravery. But as history would have it, his true destiny lay elsewhere, in philosophy. One of the great landmarks of Socratic thought is the now famous phrase, "I know that I know nothing." In a Platonic dialogue, Socrates recounted the origin of this saying. A childhood friend named Chaerephon once consulted the oracle at Delphi, the sacred site where the Pythia, prophetesses believed to channel the god Apollo, answered those who sought guidance, and asked whether anyone in the world was wiser than Socrates. The oracle's answer was no. Socrates was the wisest of all men. When Chaerephon relayed this to his friend, Socrates was deeply puzzled. Fully aware of the limits of his own understanding, he asked himself what the god could possibly mean. He resolved to investigate by seeking out a politician widely regarded as wise. After speaking with him, however, Socrates concluded that the man was not truly wise. He simply failed to recognize the limits of his own ignorance. Socrates reasoned, "I am wiser than this man. Neither of us likely knows anything of great importance, but he believes he knows something, whereas I, knowing nothing, do not suppose that I do." He went on to speak with poets and craftsmen who were also considered wise, and in each case he reached the same conclusion. They believed themselves to know more than they did. These encounters made Socrates increasingly well known throughout Athens. Much of his fame came through the Socratic method, an inquiry process in which Socrates approached all manner of people, rich or poor, young or old, in gymnasiums, public squares, and at banquets. He would question them on topics that seemed simple at first but quickly grew uncertain under scrutiny. As his interlocutors answered, Socrates would deconstruct their responses with further questions, exposing the inconsistencies and errors in their reasoning. Through this process of self-reflection, people were led to see that they did not know what they had initially assumed they understood. Socrates compared this method to the profession of midwife, his mother's profession. He believed that philosophical dialogue helped to bring forth ideas that already existed within people, as an obstetrician brings a new life into the world. This process of drawing out understanding through questioning and exposing contradiction was known as meutics. Crucially, as Xenophon noted, Socrates never accepted payment for his teaching, unlike the sophists. Another central concern in his philosophy was virtue. Socrates believed that virtue was the highest of all goods, and that a person who truly possessed knowledge was both virtuous and incapable of evil, since wrongdoing arose from ignorance, from not knowing what was truly good. In his view, there was a fundamental relationship between morality and knowledge. If we truly understand what is good, there is no reason to do evil. At the age of 60, Socrates was accused and put on trial in Athens. In the Apology, Plato recorded the philosopher's defense before his three accusers, Anytus, Meletus, and Lyco, as well as the broader assembly present at his conviction. Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth of Athens and with impiety, failing to honor the gods recognized by the city and introducing new divine figures. Both Plato and Xenophon describe his remarkable composure and peace during the proceedings. During the trial, Socrates told those present that he had a divine mission, which had begun in childhood when he heard a voice within him, a kind of personal spirit or inner guide he called his daimon, which offered him counsel and direction. Socrates was ultimately sentenced to death and compelled to drink hemlock, a powerful poison. In the Phaedo, Plato emphasized the master's extraordinary calm and courage in the face of death, describing him as the best, wisest, and most just of men. Socrates was one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived. His legacy is vast, and his influence on subsequent thinkers has been profound. Among the many things his life and thought teach us is the importance of maintaining a critical perspective on the world around us, and the value of intellectual humility in our pursuit of knowledge. Plato was an illustrious Greek philosopher whose writings have survived to the present day, rendering his ideas immortal. He was born in Athens around 427 or 428 BC into a noble family. His father was Ariston and his mother was Pariction. He had two brothers, Adimantus and Glaucon, and a sister named Pertone. His father died when he was still young, after which his mother remarried, and from that union a half-brother named Antiphon was born. Few people know that Plato was actually a nickname. The philosopher's given name was Aristocles, the same as his grandfather. The name Plato comes from the Greek Platon, meaning broad or wide, and was reportedly given to him by his wrestling coach on account of his physical stature. Plato lived through a politically turbulent period in Athens. He witnessed the Peloponnesian War, the disastrous Athenian expedition to Sicily, and a period of political upheaval during which democracy gave way to oligarchy. These events undoubtedly shaped his thinking on ethics and politics. He received a broad education in his youth, studying music, history, geometry, and arithmetic, among other subjects. He excelled both athletically and in his early philosophical studies. Through contact with his contemporary Cratylus, he developed an interest in the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus of Ephesus. He later studied the Eleatic school as well, including Parmenides, who would prove to be of particular significance to his thought. Around the age of 20, Plato became a pupil of Socrates. Although his master wrote nothing down, Plato carefully recorded much of what he learned, and a great deal of what we know about Socrates today comes directly from Plato's works. Plato had once considered a career in politics, but the trial and execution of his beloved teacher left him deeply disillusioned with Athenian government and set him on an entirely different path. After Socrates' death, Plato left Athens and moved to Megara, a city to the west. Around 388 BC, when he was approximately 40 years old, he traveled to Italy and attempted to make contact with the Pythagoreans, followers of the philosophy founded by Pythagoras of Samos. He also visited Cyrene, in present-day Libya, and Egypt, where he is said to have encountered local sages and prophets, though the historical record on these visits is uncertain. During his time in Italy, Plato met the tyrant Dionysius I, who invited him to Syracuse in Sicily in the hope that the Athenian philosopher might serve as his personal advisor. Plato hoped to influence the ruler with his political philosophy, but the relationship soured quickly. Dionysius grew so displeased with Plato that he allegedly had him sold into slavery to a Spartan from Aegina, an island near Athens. Fortunately, Plato escaped with the help of Anaxagoras of Cyrene and returned home. That first Sicilian journey did, however, yield one important friendship. Plato became close with the Greek philosopher Dion, a relative of Dionysius I. Upon returning to Athens at around 40 years old, Plato founded the philosophical school known as the Academy, located on the outskirts of the city. The name derived from Academos, a hero associated with Athens, and the site was connected to the Muses and to Apollo. Plato reportedly charged no fees to those who attended, and it is believed that at least 2 women participated in the school's activities, a notable detail for the era. In his writings, Plato explored a wide range of philosophical topics, including epistemology, politics, metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics. Among the many aspects of his philosophy, the most celebrated are the theory of forms and the allegory of the cave. The theory of forms is one of the cornerstones of Platonic philosophy and appears across many of his texts. Plato posited the existence of 2 realms: a spiritual realm, which is eternal, immutable, and stable, and a physical realm, the world we perceive through our senses, which is constantly changing and imperfect. The physical world, in Plato's view, consists of imperfect copies of what truly exists in the spiritual realm, where absolute essences reside. Everything we encounter in the sensory world is, in effect, a shadow of a deeper, truer reality. To illustrate this idea, Plato wrote the famous allegory of the cave. Imagine a group of prisoners who have been chained inside a cave since birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire casts shadows of objects onto the wall, and the prisoners, never having seen anything else, believe these shadows to be reality itself. When one prisoner is freed and emerges from the cave, he is initially blinded by the sunlight. But gradually, he comes to understand that what he saw on the wall were mere shadows, not the things themselves. He returns to share this discovery with the others, but they mock him and refuse to believe his words, content to remain in their illusion. In this allegory, the cave represents the physical world of appearances, and the world outside represents the true reality of the spiritual realm. The myth can also be read in relation to ethics and politics, and it remains one of the most enduring and widely discussed passages in all of Western philosophy. In 367 BC, Plato returned to Sicily, this time to engage with Dionysius II, who had succeeded his father and had developed an interest in philosophy. But as before, the encounter proved fruitless and marked by disagreement. Plato returned yet again in 361 BC, accompanied by his students Xenocrates and Speusippus, but this visit was equally disappointing, and reportedly nearly fatal. His friend Dion eventually came to power in Syracuse but was assassinated in 353 BC. In 360 BC, Plato returned to Athens, where he remained active until his death. He died around 347 BC, at approximately 80 years of age, and was supposedly buried in or near the grounds of his academy. The academy itself was destroyed in 86 BC by the Roman commander Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who conquered Athens that year, demolishing not only the academy but also the Lyceum, the school founded by Aristotle. Even after its destruction, however, Platonic teaching continued to be transmitted until the school was officially closed in 529 AD by order of the Roman Emperor Justinian. In the 20th century, the site of the academy was rediscovered and is now an archaeological site open to the public free of charge. Plato's philosophical legacy has influenced some of the greatest minds in history. Aristotle studied at the academy for nearly 20 years and was profoundly shaped by his teacher's thought. In 250 AD, the Greek philosopher Plotinus founded the Neoplatonic school, revisiting and reinterpreting Plato's ideas. Thinkers as diverse as St. Augustine, Porphyry, Bergson, and Arthur Schopenhauer all drew from Plato's work. Among his most celebrated writings are the Republic, the Symposium, Phaedo, Theaetetus, and Phaedrus. Plato's name is recognized even by those with little knowledge of philosophy, and his teachings continue to inspire new generations of thinkers around the world. Aristotle is one of the most important names in the history of philosophy. Alongside Socrates and Plato, he stands as one of the defining intellectual personalities of all time. His thought has endured the test of centuries and continues today to command study, debate, and admiration. Unlike his predecessors, Aristotle was not an Athenian. He was born around 384 BC in Stagira, in Thrace, a city in what is now the Chalcidice region of northern Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was a distinguished physician who served the Macedonian royal court. The historian Diogenes Laertius described Aristotle as someone with a lisping manner of speech, very thin legs, and small eyes, though the philosopher was said to dress with great elegance and paid careful attention to his appearance. Aristotle grew up in comfortable circumstances and received a thorough education. Between the ages of 16 and 17, he was sent to Athens to study at Plato's academy, where the master was already around 70 years old. Aristotle remained there for nearly 20 years, departing only after Plato's death. Following Plato's passing, the academy was taken over by his nephew Speusippus, who placed considerable emphasis on mathematics, much to Aristotle's dissatisfaction. Though he had been Plato's student, Aristotle developed philosophical ideas that diverged significantly from those of his master. He was even openly critical of certain aspects of Platonic thought. This is most evident in his approach to metaphysics, where rather than positing a separate supersensible realm as the source of truth, Aristotle grounded his philosophy in the observable, sensory world. He was also distinguished by a deep interest in empirical science, something largely absent from Plato's work. Aristotle moved to Assos, a Greek colony in Asia Minor, where he met Pythias, the niece of the local ruler Hermias, whom he married. It was a deeply happy relationship. Aristotle later wrote that after his death, he wished to be buried beside his beloved. He subsequently lived for a period in Lesbos, the capital of which was Mytilene, and it was during this time that he undertook intensive studies in biology. He observed marine life with extraordinary care and, at Assos, opened an academy devoted to biological research. One of the great contributions of Aristotle's work was the detailed study and systematic classification of animal species. He is said to have dissected animals to examine them more closely and compared life forms in nature in a way that had no precedent. His observations were so foundational that it is difficult, even today, to discuss the history of science without acknowledging his contribution. In 343 BC, Aristotle was summoned to the court of King Philip II of Macedon to serve as tutor to the king's 13-year-old son, a boy who would one day become Alexander the Great. According to Plutarch, Alexander formed a deep bond with his teacher, regarding him with profound respect and viewing him almost as a father figure. Aristotle tutored the young prince in a wide range of subjects, and his influence on Alexander's intellectual formation was considerable. He held this position for 3 years before returning to his hometown of Stagira, where he lived from around 340 to 335 BC, before finally settling in Athens. In 335 BC, on the outskirts of Athens, Aristotle founded his own philosophical school, the Lyceum, named after the nearby sanctuary of Apollo Lykios. The school's students came to be called peripatetics, from the Greek word meaning to walk, a name that reflects the famous practice of conducting philosophical discussion during leisurely walks through the school's gardens. Many notable thinkers studied there, including Aristoxenus of Tarentum, Clearchus, and Strato of Lampsacus. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great died. His death triggered a wave of anti-Macedonian sentiment in Athens, and accusations were soon leveled at Aristotle, Alexander's former tutor. Fearing for his safety, the philosopher left the city and moved to Chalcis on the Greek island of Euboea. He reportedly remarked that he had left Athens so as not to give the Athenians the chance to sin against philosophy twice, a clear reference to the fate of Socrates. The archaeological site of the Lyceum was discovered only recently, in 1996, when excavations for a modern art museum in the center of Athens, just behind the Greek parliament, unearthed its remains by chance. Since 2009, the site has been open to the public. Ancient scholars divided Aristotle's writings into 2 categories: exoteric works, intended for a general audience, and esoteric works, technical texts prepared for use within the Lyceum. Unfortunately, almost all of the exoteric writings have been lost, though a substantial portion of his total output has survived. During the Middle Ages, Aristotle's thought experienced a remarkable revival through Islamic philosophy. The Muslim philosopher and physician Averroes was a particularly influential scholar of Aristotle, and his extensive commentaries on the Greek thinker's work helped to reignite interest in Aristotelian philosophy across the medieval world. Al-Ghazali and Avicenna were also major figures in the Arabic philosophical tradition who drew deeply on Aristotle's legacy. His influence did not end there. The Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus and the Italian scientist Galileo Galilei were both shaped by, and in some cases pushed back against, Aristotelian thought. Even Charles Darwin, reflecting on the history of natural science, wrote that Linnaeus and Cuvier had been his 2 great intellectual heroes, but that both were mere schoolboys compared to Aristotle. In his writings, Aristotle addressed an extraordinary range of subjects: metaphysics, ethics, politics, logic, zoology, mathematics, and the arts, among others. Through the sheer breadth of his work, he contributed to virtually every major area of knowledge beyond philosophy itself. In 2016, during the 2,400 Years of Aristotle World Congress, a team of Greek archaeologists announced that they believed they had found Aristotle's tomb in Stagira, the city of his birth. While no definitive proof has been established, the evidence was considered compelling. The site contains characteristics that correspond closely to descriptions found in ancient documents concerning the death and burial of Aristotle's ashes. The discovery has not been officially confirmed, but the team expressed strong confidence in their findings. Aristotle was one of the world's most consequential thinkers, and his philosophical legacy continues to fascinate scholars and general readers alike. He remains a towering figure whose work is of immense and enduring significance to the history of human thought.